The alarms reverberated menacingly through the empty hallways of the maximum security facility known as Onyx Nebula, an enormous edifice drifting in the far reaches of the universe. Nolan Drake's heart raced as he dashed down the metal-clad passageway, his breaths coming in quick, measured gasps. Years of incarceration had toughened both his body and his will. This was his moment, a culmination of extensive preparation, patience, and strategic waiting. His escape would be nothing short of legendary. "Halt, Drake!" A guard's voice thundered, the sound echoing off the steel walls as a plasma rifle zeroed in on him. Nolan didn't flinch. He had anticipated every action, every conceivable scenario. Without hesitation, he leaped behind a large cargo crate, his reflexes quicker than the guard's aim. A barrage of scorching plasma bolts seared past him, heating the cold steel where he had been only an instant before. "Not today," Nolan muttered, his eyes narrowing. The guard was merely fulfilling his duty, but that wasn't going to deter him. No way, no how. He vaulted over the crate, landing lightly on the other side. His prison-issued jumpsuit strained over his muscular build. Despite the years of confinement, his reflexes remained sharp. Ahead, the emergency escape pods came into sight. Nolan's pulse quickened as he neared his destination. The entire facility was now on high alert, with alarms shrieking like wailing spirits. But he had planned for this chaos. It was part of his strategy. He slammed his palm onto the pod's access panel, bypassing the security systems he had spent weeks neutralizing. The door hissed open, and he hurled himself inside just as another hail of plasma fire erupted behind him. The pod sealed, and Nolan wasted no time. His fingers flew over the control panel, setting the launch sequence into motion. "Catch me if you can, you bastards," he snarled, a grin spreading across his face as the pod rocketed away from Onyx Nebula. The stars outside streaked into blurs of light, but his victory was fleeting. Within moments, alarms began blaring inside the pod, a sound far more alarming than the ones he had left behind. Red lights flashed ominously as the onboard AI warned of a severe system malfunction. Nolan's grin faded as he read the damage report. The pod's navigation system was fried, likely damaged during the escape. Now, he was hurtling through space with no means to steer or halt. He growled, strapping himself in as the pod began to shake violently. There was nothing he could do but brace for impact. The pod sped through the void, heading toward an unknown destination as the atmosphere of a nearby planet loomed in view. Flames licked the pod's exterior. The last thing Nolan saw before everything went dark was a dense, green jungle rushing up to meet him. Nolan awoke to the smell of burnt metal and the distant sound of unfamiliar, exotic birds. He groaned, his head throbbing as he struggled to sit up. The remnants of the escape pod lay scattered around him, twisted and charred. The crash had been severe, but somehow he was still intact. As his vision cleared, Nolan realized he wasn't alone. Standing before him, partially hidden by the thick foliage, was a woman, or what appeared to be one. Her skin was a deep, shimmering shade of blue, her hair glowing like silk down her back. Her eyes, glowing a vivid amber, were fixed on him with a look of cautious curiosity. Nolan blinked, wondering if he was still unconscious and dreaming. "An angel," he mumbled, struggling to focus. "Am I dead?" The woman's lips curved into a gentle smile. Her voice was melodic and soothing. "You're very much alive, stranger, though I can't say I know what an angel is." Nolan shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. He focused on the woman before him, her tall, lithe form and the way her unusual, flowing clothing seemed to blend with the jungle. Her beauty was otherworldly, her presence both unsettling and captivating. "I'm Zava," she said, stepping closer with fluid, almost ethereal movements. "You're the first human I've ever encountered on Eldoria. What's your name, offworlder?" Nolan managed to grin despite the pain in his ribs. "Nolan Drake. And I have to say, I've never been happier to crash in anywhere." Zava's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I suppose I should welcome you to Eldoria then, Nolan Drake, though it seems your arrival was less than planned." "You could say that," Nolan replied, testing his legs as he stood up. His muscles protested, but he forced himself to ignore the pain. But since I'm here, I wouldn't mind a bit of help getting my bearings. Maybe even a guide? Zava tilted her head, considering him. A guide? I might be able to assist, though I should warn you, Eldoria is not a place for the faint-hearted. You'll find no mercy here, especially not for an off-worlder. Good thing I'm not faint-hearted then, Nolan shot back with a wink. Besides, I've already had my fill of mercy back where I came from. Zava's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a hint of something Nolan couldn't quite place. Mischief or something darker. Very well, Nolan Drake. Follow me, and I'll show you the world you've stumbled into. But be warned, Eldoria is as deadly as it is. Beautiful. Tread carefully. Nolan nodded, his mind racing with questions, but he kept them to himself. There would be time for answers later. For now, he was alive, free, and in the company of a woman who might just hold the key to his survival in this strange new world. The journey through the dense jungle was grueling, each step a challenge. The foliage was thick, and the air was heavy with the scent of alien flora. Nolan kept his senses sharp, listening to the unfamiliar sounds around him. He could tell Zava was at ease in this environment, her movements smooth and effortless as she navigated the treacherous terrain. You're awfully quiet, Zava remarked, glancing back at him. Something on your mind, human? Just trying to figure out what kind of mess I've landed in, Nolan replied, wiping sweat from his brow. This place isn't exactly what I'm used to. Zava laughed, the sound echoing softly through the trees. Eldoria has that effect on outsiders. It's a world of extremes. One moment you'll be mesmerized by its beauty, and the next you'll be fighting for your life. Sounds like my kind of place, Nolan muttered, scanning the dense undergrowth for any signs of danger as they walked. Zava began to explain more about Eldoria, a planet forgotten by the galaxy, isolated by its treacherous landscape and hostile inhabitants. The native species, known as the Vaarin, were fiercely protective of their territory and distrusted outsiders. What brought you here, Nolan? Zava asked suddenly, her tone more serious. Few come to Eldoria willingly. Nolan hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Let's just say I had a disagreement with some powerful people. They decided a lifetime in Onyx Nebula was the best way to handle it. Zava nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. A prisoner then. Escaping from Onyx Nebula is no small feat. You must be quite resourceful. Resourceful, stubborn, call it what you want, Nolan said with a shrug. But I'm not keen on staying put when someone else decides it's my time to sit still. Zava's expression softened slightly. You'll need that determination if you want to survive here. Eldoria doesn't forgive weakness. They continued in silence for a while, the jungle closing in around them as the light from the twin suns above began to fade. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, they reached a clearing where an ancient stone structure stood, half consumed by the surrounding jungle. It was massive, its surface covered in strange carvings that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. What is this place? Nolan asked, his voice hushed. This is one of the old temples, Zava explained. The Varin believe it to be sacred, though no one remembers its true purpose. We'll be safe here for the night. Nolan eyed the temple warily. The carvings seemed to shift and move in the dim light, playing tricks on his mind. Safe, huh? Doesn't feel that way. Zava smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. You'll learn, Nolan Drake, that on Eldoria, safety is a relative term. But for now, it's as good as it gets. She led him inside, where the temperature dropped further and the air grew thick with an unnatural stillness. The interior was vast, with high ceilings and walls covered in the same glowing carvings. They set up a small camp in a corner of the temple using supplies Zava had brought. Nolan sat down, his back against the cold stone wall, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that had been growing since they arrived. Tell me more about this place, he said, hoping to distract himself. Zava settled down opposite him, her eyes gleaming in the low light. The Varin believe that the temples are the resting places of their ancient gods. They come here to offer sacrifices, hoping to appease the spirits and gain their favor. Spirits? Nolan raised an eyebrow. You believe in that stuff? Zava's gaze grew distant, her voice lowering. On Eldoria, it's hard not to. The planet has a life of its own, a will that you can feel if you stay long enough. Some say the spirits of the gods still roam the forests, watching over the Varin. Others say they are the ones who bring death to those who trespass. Comforting thought, Nolan muttered, his eyes scanning the shadows that seemed to close in from all sides. Don't worry, Nolan, Xava said softly. As long as we're respectful, the spirits will leave us be. We're only passing through. Nolan wasn't entirely convinced, but he nodded, not wanting to appear weak. They ate in silence, the strange atmosphere of the temple weighing heavily on him. He could tell Zava was more relaxed, but there was still something in her eyes, a flicker of unease she couldn't quite hide. After a while, Zava spoke again. You asked about the mess you've landed in. The truth is, you're not just dealing with the Varin or the wilds of Eldoria. There are others, offworlders like you, who came for different reasons but stayed for the same one: survival. They've carved out their own territories and they're not. The jungle night enveloped them in a cloak of shadow and silence, broken only by the occasional distant call of exotic creatures. Nolan lay on his makeshift bedroll, his thoughts racing. The strange carvings on the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, casting eerie glows that danced across the temple's interior. Zava had settled into a meditative position on her own bedroll, her eyes closed, seemingly at peace with her surroundings. Nolan envied her calmness. He had never been one to believe in mystical forces or ancient gods, but the unsettling atmosphere of the temple made him question everything he thought he knew. As the hours passed, the silence grew heavier, and Nolan's eyes grew heavy with sleep. Just as he began to drift off, a sudden rustling noise jolted him awake. He scanned the dimly lit room, heart pounding. Zava remained still, but Nolan could tell she was awake and alert. Her eyes were open, reflecting the faint light from the carvings. Did you hear that? Nolan whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. Zava's gaze shifted towards the source of the sound, her expression thoughtful. Yes, the jungle here is full of surprises. It could be anything. Nolan tensed, straining to listen. The rustling grew louder, coming closer. Any chance it's friendly? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Zava's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Eldoria has its share of dangers. I wouldn't count on it being friendly. Nolan reached for the makeshift weapon he had fashioned from a piece of broken pod debris, keeping it close as he and Zava listened intently. The rustling continued, then stopped abruptly. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the temple's entrance. It was tall and lean, with a humanoid form but covered in mottled green and brown scales. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the eerie light of the carvings. Nolan's hand tightened around his weapon. Zava, however, stood up calmly and approached the intruder, her movements smooth and unhurried. Stay calm, she murmured to Nolan. The figure stepped closer, revealing more of its features. It had a reptilian face, with sharp, angular features and a long, sinuous tail. It regarded Zava with what seemed to be cautious curiosity. Shazara, Zava said softly, her tone respectful. The creature's eyes narrowed as it studied Nolan. It made a low, throaty sound that seemed to carry both warning and acknowledgement. Zava, it responded in a language Nolan couldn't understand, but sensed the tone of authority and respect. Zava turned to Nolan. This is Shazara, a guardian of the ancient temples. The Varin hold these creatures in high regard. They are protectors of the sacred places. Nolan nodded, though he still felt uneasy. Shazara's gaze remained fixed on him, and its posture was tense, as if waiting for something. Zava spoke to Shazara in a language Nolan did not recognize, her voice soft and soothing. The guardian's stance gradually relaxed, and it made a series of rhythmic, clicking sounds, as if communicating something important. After a few moments, Zava turned back to Nolan. Shazara says that our presence here is not unwelcome, but we must respect the temple and its sanctity. We will be safe for the night as long as we honor these old traditions. Nolan's curiosity got the better of him. What else should I know about these traditions? Zava's gaze softened. Eldoria's customs are deeply tied to its history and its people. The Varin believe the spirits of their gods watch over these places. As long as we respect that belief, we won't draw their ire. The Guardian made a series of soft, reassuring sounds before retreating back into the jungle's shadows. The rustling noise ceased, leaving only the ambient sounds of the forest. Nolan exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the tension. Well, that was intense. Zava smiled faintly. Welcome to Eldoria. It's a world full of surprises, and not all of them are predictable. They settled back into their respective places, but sleep came slowly for Nolan. The jungle outside seemed alive with hidden dangers and ancient mysteries. He couldn't shake the feeling that the temple, and perhaps Eldoria itself, held secrets he was only beginning to uncover. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the temple walls, Nolan finally managed to sleep, his dreams filled with images of green jungles and mysterious figures. When morning arrived, Zava was already preparing their supplies. The light that streamed into the temple illuminated her features, giving her an ethereal quality. Nolan watched her, both fascinated and apprehensive about the unknown journey ahead. We should get moving, Zava said, glancing at him with a mixture of anticipation and concern. The deeper we go into Eldoria, the more we'll understand its secrets and dangers. Are you ready? Nolan nodded, determination setting in. As ready as I'll ever be. Let's see what this world has to offer. Zava led the way, and Nolan followed, stepping out of the temple and back into the dense, vibrant jungle. The world outside was alive with color and sound, an ever-shifting tapestry of wonder and peril. Their journey had only just begun, and Nolan was about to discover that Eldoria was far more than he had ever imagined. Nolan and Xava emerged from the ancient temple into the fresh light of dawn. The jungle stretched out before them, a lush expanse of verdant green and vibrant hues. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming alien flora, and the sounds of the forest seemed to hum with life. Zava moved with an effortless grace, her steps light and sure on the uneven ground. Nolan followed closely, his senses alert to every rustle and crackle in the dense foliage. The jungle was an alien world, filled with strange plants and creatures he had never encountered before. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Nolan's gaze wandered to the towering trees and exotic flowers. Some of the plants seemed to glow with bioluminescence, casting a soft, eerie light in the shaded undergrowth. The diversity of life was overwhelming, and Nolan struggled to keep up with Zava's swift pace. This place is incredible, Nolan said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the awe in his tone. I've never seen anything like it. Zava glanced back with a smile. Eldoria has a way of surprising those who venture here. It's a world of extremes, as I mentioned. It can be breathtakingly beautiful or dangerously hostile. Nolan nodded, taking in the vibrant landscape. I'm guessing there's a lot more to this place than just the jungle. Zava's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. Indeed. Eldoria is home to various regions, each with its own unique challenges and wonders. The jungle we're traversing now is just one part of it. There are deserts, mountains, and even vast underground caverns. Nolan's curiosity was piqued. And what about the Varin? What's their deal with all these old temples and sacred sites? Zava's expression grew more serious. The Varin have a deep connection to the land. They believe that their ancestors' spirits inhabit these sacred places, and they have a strong reverence for the old ways. The temples we saw last night are remnants of their ancient civilization, places where they conduct rituals and seek guidance from their gods. Nolan thought about the guardian they had encountered and the way Zava had communicated with it. So, the Varin still believe in these old gods? Zava nodded. Yes, and they believe that the spirits of their ancestors watch over them. The guardians, like Shazara, are seen as protectors of these sacred sites. They are not to be trifled with, but they are also not inherently hostile if we respect their traditions. As they continued through the jungle, the terrain became more challenging. The undergrowth thickened, and the path they followed was less defined. Nolan had to push aside large, vine-like plants and navigate around twisted roots that seem to reach out like grasping fingers. We're heading towards a settlement, Zava said, breaking the silence. It's not far now. The Varin village is known for its hospitality, but they will be wary of outsiders. Nolan looked at her, intrigued. So, we're going to meet the Varin? Zava's gaze was steady. Yes, they might be able to offer more information about Eldoria and its dangers. They are knowledgeable about the land and its hidden threats. After several hours of trudging through the jungle, they finally reached the outskirts of the Varin village. The settlement was nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering trees and dense foliage. The architecture was unique, with structures built into the trees and suspended platforms connected by bridges of woven vines. The Varin, who appeared to be a mix of humanoid and reptilian, were initially cautious as they approached. They had scales in varying shades of green and brown, and their eyes were keen and watchful. Zava spoke to them in a language Nolan didn't understand, her tone respectful and reassuring. The Varin leader, a tall figure with intricate markings on its scales, approached them. The leader's gaze settled on Nolan, assessing him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Zava translated the leader's words for Nolan. He wishes to know your purpose here, Zava said. They are particularly cautious of strangers. Nolan took a deep breath, preparing himself. Tell them I'm an outsider who crashed on their planet, and that I'm seeking information and assistance. I mean no harm. Zava conveyed the message, and the leader's expression softened slightly. After a moment of deliberation, the leader nodded and gestured for them to follow. They were led to a large central structure, which seemed to serve as a communal area for the village. The interior of the structure was adorned with intricate carvings and symbols, much like the ones in the temple. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the tense encounter they had had outside. Nolan and Xava were offered seats on woven mats, and a small group of Varin gathered around them. The leader began speaking, and Xava translated. They are willing to share what they know, Xava said, but they will expect us to abide by their customs and respect their traditions. Nolan nodded, appreciating the chance to learn more about the planet he had crashed on. I'm ready to listen. I need to understand this place if I'm going to survive. The leader nodded in approval and began to recount stories and legends about Eldoria. They spoke of ancient times, of great battles fought to protect their land, and of the gods who once walked among them. As the stories unfolded, Nolan learned more about the complex web of beliefs and traditions that shaped the Varin's worldview. He discovered that Eldoria was a land of ancient magic and powerful forces, where the natural world was intimately connected to the spiritual realm. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, Nolan felt a growing sense of understanding. Eldoria was not just a place of physical challenges, but also a world steeped in deep, mystical traditions. Xava and Nolan were given a place to stay for the night in the village, a small but comfortable dwelling nestled among the trees. As Nolan lay down to rest, he reflected on the day's events and the new knowledge he had gained. Eldoria was a land of great beauty and danger, filled with ancient mysteries and powerful beings. Nolan knew that his journey was far from over, and that he had much more to discover about this strange new world. As sleep claimed him, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that Eldoria had more in store for him than he had anticipated. The real adventure, he sensed, was only just beginning.